The trauma bay at Harborview Medical Center had seen worse nights, but not many. November rain hammered Seattle's windows like bullets, and inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed over chaos that felt electric. Alex Martinez pulled his scrubs tighter as another ambulance wailed toward the entrance. 3 years as a nurse here, and nights like this still made his pulse race. He wasn't supposed to be the one they called when things got desperate. He was the quiet guy who restocked supplies, who took extra shifts without complaint, who kept his head down and his past buried. But when the paramedics burst through the doors carrying Captain Dylan Brooks on a stretcher, something in Alex's chest seized like a fist closing around his heart. The patient's left arm hung wrong, wrapped in field bandages that were already soaked through. His face was pale as Seattle fog, and Alex could see the telltale signs of shock setting in. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, immediately began her assessment, her voice sharp and clinical as she rattled off instructions to the trauma team. But Alex wasn't hearing her words anymore. He was staring at Dylan's face, and suddenly he was back in the dust and heat of Afghanistan, watching a different stretcher being carried into a different medical tent. The same strong jaw, the same scar above the right eyebrow, the same tattoo partially visible on the patient's shoulder where the hospital gown had shifted. This was Captain Dylan Brooks, the special operations officer whose life Alex had saved during an IED attack outside Kandahar 3 years ago. Back when Alex went by a different name, when he was Corpsman Marcus Rivera, and when saving lives in a war zone was just another Tuesday morning, Dr. Chen's voice cut through his memories like a blade. The preliminary assessment looked grim. Severe compartment syndrome in the left arm, circulation compromised, possible nerve damage. Without immediate intervention, amputation was becoming a real possibility. Alex watched her examine the swelling, the discoloration, the way Dylan's fingers had gone cold and white. Bobby Martinez, the charge nurse and Alex's distant cousin, noticed him standing frozen. Bobby had always been uncomfortable around Alex, especially since learning about his sexuality through family gossip. His voice carried just enough edge to make everyone nearby look up. "Alex, if you're going to stand there like a statue, at least make yourself useful and prep the surgical bay." Alex nodded, but his hands were shaking as he reached for the supply cart. The sounds of the trauma bay, the beeping monitors and urgent voices, were mixing with phantom sounds from Afghanistan. Artillery fire, helicopter rotors, the voice of a medic calling for more blood. He gripped the cart handle harder, trying to anchor himself in the present. Dylan was conscious but sedated, his eyes drifting in and out of focus. For just a moment, their gazes met across the chaos of the trauma bay. Alex saw something flicker in those eyes, a recognition that was deeper than morphine-induced confusion. Dylan's lips moved silently, forming a word that only Alex could read: Marcus. The recognition hit both of them like a shock wave, here in a Seattle emergency room, surrounded by the controlled chaos of modern medicine. Two veterans who had shared blood and fire in a desert half a world away were face to face again. Alex felt his professional composure crack slightly, the careful walls he'd built around his past starting to crumble. Dr. Chen was already discussing surgical options with the team, her voice carrying the weight of impending bad news. The damage appeared extensive, the circulation severely compromised. Time was running out, and the standard protocols weren't offering much hope. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with the courage to trust your instincts when everyone else has given up. Alex was about to learn that some reunions come with a second chance to save the same life twice. If this story is already pulling at your heart, subscribe to Heart Stories, where every courage finds its moment and every second trauma writes itself into something beautiful. The memory hit Alex like a flashbang grenade, sudden and blinding. Afghanistan, July 2019. The temperature had been climbing toward 120 degrees when the convoy hit the improvised explosive device outside Forward Operating Base Kandahar. Alex remembered the dust cloud, the ringing in his ears, the way time seemed to slow down as he ran toward the wreckage. Captain Dylan Brooks had been trapped under a piece of twisted metal, his left arm pinned and bleeding. But it wasn't just the physical trauma that Alex remembered most vividly. It was the way Dylan had looked at him while Alex worked to stop the bleeding, the way their eyes had held longer than necessary, the way Dylan had whispered thanks in a voice that carried more than gratitude. They had both been soldiers trying to survive in a place where being different meant being dangerous. Alex had joined the military after his parents disowned him for being gay, thinking that service might somehow prove his worth. Dylan had been fighting his own battles with identity, carrying the weight of a secret relationship with another soldier who hadn't made it home. The sound of Bobby Martinez clearing his throat loudly yanked Alex back to the present. Bobby had always been the family member who made holidays uncomfortable, the one who used Alex's real name like a weapon when he wanted to remind everyone of what he considered Alex's past mistakes. His voice carried across the trauma bay with deliberate volume. Dr. Chen was consulting with the orthopedic surgeon on call, their conversation growing more urgent as Dylan's condition deteriorated. Alex could see the signs that the medical team was missing, the subtle indicators he'd learned to recognize in field conditions. This wasn't a straightforward arterial injury requiring surgical repair. The pattern of swelling, the specific areas of discoloration, the way the fingers were positioned, it all pointed to something different. Alex found himself moving toward the supply closet, needing space to think and breathe. Inside, surrounded by boxes of gauze and antiseptic, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, he pressed his back against the wall and closed his eyes. The smell of medical supplies mixed with his memories of field hospitals and emergency triage. Nurse Jamie Walsh found him there 5 minutes later. Jamie was a 15-year veteran of Harborview's trauma unit, a motherly figure who had taken Alex under her wing when he started working here. Her son had come out to her 2 years earlier, and she'd become an unofficial ally to LGBTQ staff members who needed someone to understand their struggles. She took one look at Alex's face and knew something was wrong. Her voice was gentle, but concerned as she asked if he was okay. Alex wanted to tell her about the flashbacks, about recognizing Dylan, about the medical opinion that was burning in his chest like swallowed fire. Instead, he just nodded and said he needed another minute. Back in the trauma bay, Dr. Chen was preparing Dylan for transport to surgery. Alex could hear her explaining the procedure to her resident, the planned approach for what she believed was a complex arterial repair. But Alex knew she was wrong. He'd seen this exact presentation before, in a medical tent where protocols mattered less than results. The condition wasn't arterial damage requiring vascular surgery. It was compartment syndrome, where swelling pressure inside the muscle compartments was cutting off circulation. The solution wasn't a delicate arterial repair. It was a fasciotomy, a procedure that involved making precise incisions to relieve the pressure and restore blood flow. Alex had performed the same procedure on Dylan 3 years ago, working with basic field equipment in adrenaline-fueled precision. He'd saved Dylan's arm then, and he could save it again now. If anyone would listen to a nurse who wasn't supposed to have surgical experience, but challenging a respected attending physician's diagnosis wasn't something nurses did, especially nurses who were already walking a careful line between acceptance and suspicion. Alex felt the weight of his position, his sexuality, his hidden military background, all pressing down on him like stones in his chest. Dylan's eyes found his again across the busy trauma bay, and Alex saw something that made his decision for him. It was trust, pure and simple, the kind that can only be forged in life or death moments. Dylan remembered who had saved him before, and his eyes were asking if Alex was brave enough to do it again. Sometimes our greatest battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the parts of ourselves that have learned to stay quiet when speaking up could change everything. Alex's hands had stopped shaking. Standing outside the trauma bay, watching Dr. Chen prep Dylan for what he knew was the wrong surgery, something crystallized inside him. He'd spent 3 years learning to blend in, to be the nurse who followed orders and never questioned authority. But Dylan's life hung in the balance, and staying quiet felt like betrayal. He approached Dr. Chen during a brief lull in the chaos, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to suggest. "Dr. Chen, I think we might be looking at compartment syndrome rather than arterial damage. The presentation, the specific pattern of swelling, it's consistent with pressure buildup in the muscle compartments. Dr. Chen paused, her hands still gloved and ready for surgery. She was a brilliant surgeon who'd climbed every ladder in her field, fighting against assumptions about Asian women in medicine. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but medical degrees and determination, and she'd inherited both their precision and their skepticism of unsolicited advice. Her response was polite but dismissive. The imaging clearly shows vascular compromise, and the patient's history indicates blunt force trauma consistent with arterial injury. Alex felt the familiar weight of being dismissed, but Dylan's pale face across the room gave him strength he didn't know he had. Bobby Martinez had been listening from the nurse's station, and now he stepped closer with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His voice carried just enough volume to make sure everyone nearby could hear. "Alex, you're a good nurse, but maybe leave the diagnostics to the doctors. We all have our place here." The words stung because they carried the weight of years of family disapproval, of being told to know his place not just as a nurse, but as a gay man who'd somehow lost his way. But Alex had learned something in the desert that Bobby would never understand. Sometimes knowing your place means knowing when to step out of it. Jamie Walsh appeared at Alex's shoulder, her presence solid and supportive. She'd seen enough medical emergencies to recognize when someone was trying to speak truth to authority, and she'd watched Alex work long enough to trust his instincts. Her voice was calm but pointed as she addressed Dr. Chen. "Dr. Chen, Alex has excellent assessment skills. Maybe it's worth considering his observation before we proceed." Dr. Chen looked between them, clearly frustrated by the delay, but professional enough to listen. She asked Alex to explain his reasoning, her tone suggesting she was humoring him rather than seriously considering his input. Alex described what he'd observed about the swelling pattern, the way the discoloration followed compartment boundaries rather than vascular territories, the specific positioning of Dylan's fingers that indicated nerve compression from pressure rather than lack of blood supply. His voice gained confidence as he spoke, drawing on knowledge that came from experience most nurses weren't supposed to have. But he couldn't explain where that experience came from without revealing his military background, and that felt too dangerous. Hospital staff knew him as Alex Martinez, the quiet nurse who worked extra shifts and never caused trouble. They didn't know about corpsman Marcus Rivera, who'd performed emergency procedures in conditions that would terrify most medical professionals. Dr. Chen's expression shifted as Alex spoke. She was hearing medical reasoning that was more sophisticated than she'd expected from a floor nurse. And despite her initial resistance, she found herself reconsidering the case. The patient's presentation was unusual, and there were aspects that didn't perfectly fit her initial diagnosis. Time was running short, and Dylan's condition was deteriorating. Dr. Chen made a decision that surprised everyone. She ordered additional imaging to confirm the diagnosis, but also asked Alex to explain what intervention he would recommend if his assessment was correct. Alex felt every pair of eyes in the trauma bay focus on him. This was the moment where he either retreated to safety or stepped fully into the light. His voice was steady as he described the fasciotomy procedure, the specific incisions needed to relieve compartment pressure, the techniques for ensuring adequate decompression without causing additional damage. Bobby Martinez was staring at him with open suspicion, clearly wondering where a floor nurse had learned surgical techniques. Other staff members were whispering among themselves, some supportive, others skeptical, but Alex kept his focus on Dr. Chen, knowing that her decision would determine whether Dylan kept his arm or lost it. Dr. Chen studied the additional imaging when it came back, comparing it with Alex's observations. What she saw made her pause. The evidence was beginning to support the nurse's assessment, and her scientific integrity wouldn't let her ignore facts just because they came from an unexpected source. She looked at Alex with new respect, and perhaps a hint of curiosity about how he developed such precise diagnostic skills. Her next words would either validate his courage or confirm his worst fears about speaking up. Sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to let someone suffer when you have the knowledge to help them. Dr. Chen's decisions surprised everyone in the trauma bay. After reviewing the additional imaging and considering Alex's assessment, she made a call that would either save Dylan's arm or end her reputation for flawless judgment. She authorized Alex to assist in performing the fasciotomy, acknowledging that his diagnostic reasoning had been sound. The procedure required precision that most people assume nurses didn't possess. Alex scrubbed in beside Dr. Chen, his hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that comes from experience under pressure. As he made the first incision along the compartment boundary, his movements were confident and exact, each cut designed to relieve pressure while minimizing tissue damage. Bobby Martinez watched from outside the surgical bay, his face a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Other staff members had gathered as word spread that Alex was performing techniques they'd never seen from him before. Jamie Walsh stood among them with pride and curiosity, realizing there were depths to her colleague that she'd never suspected. The moment the compartments were open, blood flow returned to Dylan's hand with dramatic speed. Color flooded back into his fingers, and the monitors showed immediate improvement in circulation. Dr. Chen nodded with professional respect, acknowledging that Alex's assessment had been completely accurate and his intervention had saved Dylan's arm and military career. As they completed the procedure, Alex felt Dylan's eyes on him through the mild sedation. There was recognition there, and gratitude, but also questions that would need answers when Dylan was fully awake. 3 years had passed since that dusty medical tent in Afghanistan, but the trust between them remained intact. Dr. Chen addressed the gathered staff as they finished, her voice carrying new appreciation for the nurse who just demonstrated surgical skills that rivaled her residents. She publicly credited Alex with the correct diagnosis and successful intervention, making it clear that Dylan's positive outcome was directly a result of Alex's courage to speak up. The trauma bay gradually returned to its normal rhythm, but Alex felt fundamentally changed. For 3 years, he'd hidden behind the identity of a quiet floor nurse, keeping his military medical training secret along with so much else about his past. Tonight, saving Dylan had required him to step into the light, to claim the skills and knowledge he'd earned through service and sacrifice. Later, when Dylan was stable and awake in recovery, Alex found himself standing beside the bed they'd shared so much history. Dylan's voice was soft but clear as he spoke the name Alex hadn't heard in years. "Marcus, I knew it was you the moment I saw your hands work. Some things don't change, even when everything else does." Alex felt tears he had been holding back for years finally surface. He'd carried so much shame about leaving the military, about changing his name, about starting over in civilian life as someone completely different. But Dylan's recognition felt like forgiveness, like an acknowledgement that all his identities were valid and valuable. They talked quietly about the years since Afghanistan, about the different paths they'd taken to reach this moment. Dylan spoke about his own struggles with military culture and identity, about the therapy he'd finally started, about the courage it took to admit that serving his country didn't require him to hide who he was. Alex shared his journey from combat medic to civilian nurse, the education he'd completed using veteran benefits, the family relationships he'd lost, and the new community he'd slowly built in Seattle. They were both different people than they'd been in that desert, but the core of who they were had remained constant. Hospital Administrator Jennifer Park appeared in the doorway with Dr. Chen, both looking at Alex with expressions he'd never seen before. They'd been discussing the evening's events, particularly how a floor nurse had demonstrated advanced surgical skills that saved a patient's limb when traditional protocols might have failed. Jennifer's words were carefully chosen, but their meaning was clear. The hospital valued staff members who brought diverse experience and expertise to their work, and there might be opportunities for Alex to contribute in ways that better utilize his full skill set. She mentioned their veteran healthcare initiative and the need for staff who understood military medical culture. Dr. Chen added that she'd be recommending Alex for the nurse practitioner program, noting that his diagnostic abilities and procedural skills suggested he was ready for expanded responsibilities. The conversation felt like recognition not just of his medical competence, but of his worth as a complete professional. As the administrators left, Alex sat quietly beside Dylan's bed, processing how much his life had shifted in a single night. He'd saved the same man twice now, But this time, saving Dylan had also meant saving himself from the limitations he'd accepted as permanent. True strength isn't about hiding our past experiences, but finding ways to honor them while building the future we actually want to live. 3 days later, Dylan was sitting up in his hospital bed, flexing his fingers with obvious relief and amazement. The fasciotomy had been completely successful, and feeling was returning to his hand ahead of the most optimistic projections. Alex stopped by during his shift, ostensibly to check on the patient's progress, but really to continue conversations they'd started years ago in very different circumstances. Dylan had been thinking about identity and authenticity since waking up from surgery. His near miss with amputation had crystallized something he'd been avoiding for too long. He told Alex about starting therapy with a counselor who specialized in military trauma, about finally processing the loss of his partner in Afghanistan, about considering whether hiding his sexuality was worth the emotional cost. Alex listened with the kind of understanding that only comes from walking similar paths. He shared his own journey with therapy, the work he'd done to process not just combat trauma, but family rejection, the slow process of building self-acceptance after years of believing he was fundamentally flawed for being gay. Their conversation was interrupted by Jamie Walsh, who knocked softly before entering with paperwork and barely contained excitement. She'd been talking with the hospital's Veteran Services coordinator about Alex's background and his interest in expanding his role. There was funding available for staff to pursue advanced certifications, particularly in areas where the hospital wanted to improve their services. The Veteran Healthcare Initiative was expanding, and they needed nurse practitioners who understood military culture and could bridge the gap between civilian healthcare and the unique needs of service members. Alex's combination of combat medical experience and civilian nursing made him an ideal candidate for the program. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway with news of her own. The medical school had been impressed by reports of Alex's diagnostic skills and surgical competence. They were offering him a pathway into their nurse practitioner program with partial scholarship support. Recognizing his military service and demonstrated clinical excellence, Alex felt overwhelmed by possibilities he'd never imagined. For 3 years, he'd accepted a limited version of himself, believing that his past disqualified him from the future he actually wanted. Now he was being offered opportunities to integrate all parts of his identity into work that felt meaningful and authentic. Dylan reached out to squeeze Alex's hand, a gesture of support that felt natural despite the professional setting. He spoke about his own decision to apply for a position with the military's diversity and inclusion initiatives, using his experience to help other LGBTQ service members navigate challenges they'd both faced in isolation. Bobby Martinez appeared in the doorway, his expression uncertain. He'd been watching Alex's transformation over the past few days, seeing his cousin receive recognition and opportunities that challenged everything Bobby thought he knew about success and worthiness. His voice was quieter than usual as he asked if they could talk privately. Outside Dylan's room, Bobby struggled to find words for feelings he had never examined closely. He admitted that he'd been uncomfortable with Alex's sexuality because of his own fears and limited understanding. Watching Alex save a life with skills Bobby didn't even know he possessed had forced him to confront his own prejudices and assumptions. The conversation was awkward but genuine, marked by the kind of honesty that families rarely achieve until crisis forces them into deeper truth. Bobby didn't become an instant ally, but he took the first steps towards seeing Alex as a complete person rather than a collection of characteristics that made him uncomfortable. Alex returned to Dylan's room to find him drafting an email to his parents. After years of careful distance and surface-level communication, Dylan was ready to tell them about his sexuality and his relationship history. The email was thoughtful and direct, acknowledging their conservative values while asserting his own right to authenticity. They spent the afternoon talking about coming out as an ongoing process rather than a single event, about finding communities where they could be complete versions of themselves, about using their professional positions to make things easier for other LGBTQ veterans and healthcare workers. By evening, Alex had submitted his application for the nurse practitioner program, with plans to specialize in emergency medicine and veteran healthcare. Dylan was scheduled for a discharge the following day, with full function returning to his arm and a new sense of clarity about his personal and professional direction. Their goodbye was warm but not final. They'd exchanged contact information and made tentative plans to attend a veterans support group that met monthly in Capitol Hill. Both recognized that their reunion had catalyzed changes they'd been avoiding for years, and they wanted to support each other through the ongoing work of building authentic lives. 3 months later, Alex was deep into his advanced studies while working part-time in Harborview's emergency department. Dylan had been accepted into a new military program focused on LGBTQ inclusion and was planning his first presentation for officer training. They met regularly for coffee near Pike Place Market, building a friendship based on shared experience and mutual respect. The hospital had implemented new protocols for consulting with nurses who had specialized military medical training. Recognizing that expertise comes in many forms, Alex had become an informal advocate for other LGBTQ staff members, helping create workplace policies that acknowledge the full humanity of healthcare workers. Have you ever hidden parts of yourself because you thought they weren't valuable, only to discover they were exactly what someone else needed? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more inspiring tales of people who found the courage to show up completely as themselves when it mattered most.